Hey guys! Tonight we ease back into a parlor where the air hangs heavy with the scent of bergamot oil and the faint burn of coal smoke. You're standing in a room upholstered in velvet and restraint. There's a china teacup trembling on a saucer, and just beneath the polite small talk, something's being hidden. Not in a drawer, not under the floorboards, but up high, wound into ringlets, tucked beneath a bonnet. You're about to walk straight into a world where secrets aren't whispered, they're quaffed. You probably won't survive this. Not because of any danger, mind you, but because halfway through the explanation of crimping comb hierarchy, your brain might gently give up. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your location and local time in the comments, so I know where in the world you're about to be lulled to sleep. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You blink through the steam rising off a polished silver kettle, and there she is, a Victorian governess methodically winding her hair into impossibly tight curls. Every movement is deliberate, every bobby pin jammed in place with military precision. Her hairstyle to you looks like a very confusing cinnamon roll, but to her, it's armor. In Victorian England, hair was no small thing. Women didn't just style it, they lived inside it. Hair was an extension of virtue, of patience, of class, and it was also a place to hide things. Mainstream historians agree that hair rituals served deeply coded cultural functions. The act of brushing, braiding, and curling was a public performance of private life. But fringe theorists and material historians dig deeper, literally finding evidence that women were storing more than symbolism in those locks. Take the hair receiver, a delicate ceramic vessel placed on a vanity. Women would sweep up shed hair from brushes and place it into this dainty urn. Sounds sweet. Except they'd then use that clump to stuff little sausage-like forms called rats. These were then hidden under styled hair to create more volume. And sometimes, though rarely spoken of aloud, those rats could be used to conceal more than just stray strands. A lock of another woman's hair. A lover's note. A tiny cloth sachet soaked in perfume or chloroform, depending on which historian you ask. Victorians had an obsession with layers, and nowhere was this more literal than their hairstyles. Now imagine a society where gossip traveled faster than trains and reputations were delicate as doilies. A well-coiffed woman might find herself needing to pass along information, perhaps a private address or a forbidden invitation, and find that slipping it into a bustle was too risky. But if you fold a note, tight wrap it in a thin fabric square, and sew it into the base of a plait, you're safe. Safer than the men who had no such fluffy concealment advantage. Which is why, of course, some men in espionage circles reportedly enlisted female allies with thick, obedient hair. Historians still argue whether this use of hair as a hiding place was widespread or only confined to certain social classes. Some say it's overblown, more romantic myth than fact. But then you learn about how common it was for women to exchange plaits of hair as tokens of loyalty, or how often lovers kept locks in pendants, and suddenly the idea of hiding meaning in your hair doesn't seem so far-fetched. You picture it now, a woman sitting at her mirror, candlelight, flickering over polished brass. She lifts a section of hair and twists it just so tighter on one side, looser on the other. To the untrained eye, it's just vanity. But to someone who knows that asymmetry might be a message, a warning, a promise, in some circles, hairstyling became its own language. Ringlets over the left shoulder meant interested. 2 pins exposed might signal grief. And while none of this was ever officially documented, the whispers persist. Like the idea that women wore iron hairpins to ground negative energy or redirect spiritual surveillance. A sort of tinfoil hat, but make it fashion. And then there's the role of hair in mourning rituals, which we'll get to properly soon. But even now, in this parlor of perfect posture and too sweet tea, you sense that something is off. The way she keeps adjusting her side bun, how it seems to shift when she turns her head. You lean in closer, and in that subtle moment before the hairnet settles over it, you think you catch a glint. Not metal, not light, but ink. Faint blue letters curling along thin paper tucked neatly into a coil. You blink again and it's gone. She smiles. The tea is ready. You're still in the parlor, though now the kettle has quieted and the scent of scones has crept in through a side door. The governess has stepped away, leaving behind a hairbrush full of golden strands and an odd-looking velvet pillow shaped like a sausage. It's a rat, though no actual rodents are involved. Just repurposed human hair delicately stitched and rolled for one singular fashionable mission volume. But of course, Victorians never settled for a single function. The same rat that made a hairstyle fuller could also act as a small secret pouch. This wasn't some one-off improvisation. Hairpieces became tiny hollow chambers for all manner of things you weren't supposed to be carrying. A folded photograph, a pressed flower, a splinter of paper with a single name. You trudge softly across the parlor rug, glancing at the vanity where a faded instruction card for a French pad bouffant sits beside an ivory hairpin case. It reads more like a heist blueprint than a fashion guide. Roll toward base. Pin inward, hide seam, and now you can't unsee it. These weren't just grooming rituals, they were tactical operations. Many Victorian women, particularly upper-class ones, wore multiple false hairpieces to enhance their hairstyles. Entire side buns were sometimes completely artificial, blended with saved hair from hairbrushes or even purchased on the street. Yes, people sold bags of hair. The result: a perfect place to tuck away something you didn't want your husband or your housemaid to find. Now, historians will tell you that padding the hair with rats was purely cosmetic, designed to create the desired silhouette. And they're right, mostly. But more curious scholars have uncovered objects stitched into the seams of antique hairpieces during museum restoration. Miniature keys bead strands that don't match the era. And on one spectacular occasion, a shard of mirror wrapped in waxed cloth. You wonder now about the morning routine. How many women, under the guise of fixing their hair, were actually preparing for something far more clandestine? Each tug of a comb wasn't just vanity, it was a calibration. And then there were the so-called secret stylists, unverified of course, who allegedly offered enhanced hair fittings for ladies with reasons to hide. These quiet professionals were said to be seamstresses turned stylists, using needle and thread to insert small cloth-lined slots inside larger buns. Some say they charged extra for silence. Others say they vanished mysteriously around 1891. You peer again at the soft velvet rat resting beside the brush. Its center seam is stitched tight but unevenly. That's odd, isn't it? Your fingers itch to open it, but the scene shifts. You're no longer in a parlor. Now you're in a train car mid-journey from Bath to London. Across from you sits a young woman with a basket of lace, her hair piled high in a gravity-defying updo. She's quiet. Too quiet. And when a man in uniform brushes past her shoulder, her hand gently adjusts a strand of hair behind her ear. Except it wasn't out of place, and neither was that subtle tug of her hairnet, as if confirming something's still there. Was it a message? A map? A pinprick? Note about an elopement? We'll never know. Historians still argue whether the use of hair as a stash spot was ever systematic. There's no instruction manual, no salon ledger confirming. Inserted note under twist today, 3p. But what they do find hidden in museum drawers, old estates, and the margins of personal letters suggests a whisper of a pattern. Like the woman who wrote in 1867, "I keep his words with me always woven near the nape." Or the diary fragment from 1882 describing a parcel rolled into the pad behind my ear, stitched with Mary's thread. And perhaps most tellingly, the existence of folding hairbrushes used for travel, yes, but also suspected of being used to slip notes directly into rats without ever unpinning the whole head. Back in the train car, the woman meets your gaze. Just briefly, she doesn't smile, but her left bun shifts ever so slightly the way a pouch might when something inside it settles. You look away politely, pretending to admire the countryside. The lace in her lap rustles, and you notice one long golden strand curling around her index finger. She twirls it like a ribbon. Maybe it's habit. Maybe it's code. Victorians loved codes after all. They just preferred theirs to be subtle. Subtle enough that centuries later, we're still trying to untangle them. The train disappears, replaced by silence, replaced by shadow, replaced by the soft ticking of a clock in a private sitting room. You're now standing inside the bedroom of a young widow. Heavy drapes are drawn against the light and every surface wears a thin coat of dust. But on the vanity polished to perfection sits something strange, a glass locket hinged like a book, with a coil of hair pressed behind crystal. You lean in. The hair inside is chestnut brown and tightly braided, impossibly neat, held together by a loop of black silk. And beneath it, barely visible unless the light hits just right, is a line of ink, faded but not entirely gone. You read it aloud. Just 2 words. Forgive me. In the Victorian era, mourning hair jewelry wasn't just a trend, it was practically a rite of passage. When someone died, especially someone close, it was common for a lock of their hair to be clipped and preserved. Sometimes it was worn in a locket, sometimes braided into a bracelet, and sometimes, if you had means, woven into full brooches or even elaborate framed art. The point wasn't just remembrance, it was presence. It was proof. He was here, the hair said. I touched him. I touched this. And unlike a photograph or a name etched into marble hair, doesn't fade so easily. In fact, well-preserved Victorian hair can survive hundreds of years. Mainstream historians catalog entire collections of mourning jewelry, noting the incredible craftsmanship, the symbolism in different weave patterns, and the materials used. But not all of these keepsakes were about death. Some were about scandal, or shame, or secret love. You lift another locket from the vanity. This one is tarnished and dented. Its clasp resists, then opens with a soft pop. Inside is a thinner curl of hair, jet black this time, and nothing else. No initials, no inscription, just the faint scent of rose pomade and a feeling you weren't meant to see it. Historians still argue whether secret lockets were an actual category or just private items that happened to be found long after context faded. But some pieces turn up in odd places: the underside of floorboards, the backs of drawers with false panels. One such locket was found inside a hollowed-out hairbrush tucked behind a rosette of bristles. And the contents: a grayish-brown braid wound around a scrap of muslin that bore the imprint of dried flowers and the letter H. Just that H. Of course, not all mourning jewelry was sorrowful. In some cases, hair was exchanged while both parties were alive, especially lovers kept apart by circumstance, class, or society's disapproval. A woman might keep her beloved's hair wound into a ring and wear it beneath gloves. Or she might cut off a lock of her own and deliver it under false packaging, usually with the help of a trusted maid or hairdresser. Which brings us to the hairdressers of the era, quiet, watchful, and almost always underappreciated. These women, often servants, learned every secret of the household, not by eavesdropping but by detangling. They held their employers' heads in their hands. They knew which strands were falling out. They knew who cried while brushing, and occasionally, they knew where the real keepsakes were hidden. There's one diary entry from a maid named Clara written in 1872. She asked me for the braid it reads, and I gave it to her as instructed. But it was not hers, and I am certain now that it never was. No explanation, no signature, just a moment captured forever. You turn toward the wardrobe still inside this widow's room. Tucked into the corner is a black hat box. Inside, a mourning veil stiff with starch. And coiled up in its folds, another braid, this one wrapped in parchment. You don't open the parchment, you're not ready. But you know it holds something weighty. A name, a confession, a pact. Victorian mourning wasn't just about death, it was about possession. Hair became a substitute for the person, a stand-in for memory, guilt, longing, and it was always with you, wrapped around your wrist, laced into your comb, coiled under your collar, and sometimes, like now, hidden where no one was supposed to find it. The room shifts again. You're now standing beneath a low chandelier in an upstairs salon somewhere off the edge of Regent Street. The lamps hiss with gaslight, and mirrors reflect mirrors, making the narrow room feel infinite. But what really draws your eye are the women, half a dozen of them, sitting stiffly before vanities, their hairdos freshly sculpted, their expressions unreadable. You glance to your left. A hairdresser leans in close to one client's ear. She whispers something. The client nods once, almost imperceptibly, and then touches the base of her chignon with 2 fingers. You sense something just passed between them, though no object changed hands. It's here that rumor begins to blur with record. You're hearing the name now. The Society of the Hidden Coil, a whispered phrase always spoken with a little too much intrigue to be entirely credible. But the idea has circulated in certain academic corners for decades. Supposedly, it was an informal network of Victorian women who communicated using a covert visual language embedded into their hairstyles. According to one rare account, the society had patterns for arranging curls, knots, and braids, each with a specific meaning. A double bun parted center left could indicate bad news. A rosette curl set above the left ear, proceed with caution. These weren't espionage codes per se, but rather subtle signals shared among friends, lovers, or even operatives cloaked as socialites. Mainstream historians remain skeptical. There's no surviving manual, no decoding key, and no confirmed member list. But here's the odd part: the styles described in second-hand letters, styles that supposedly meant something, do appear in fashion illustrations from the 1860s and 70s. Often they're just slightly off, too symmetrical to be accidental, too specific to be meaningless. You move closer to one woman seated in the salon. Her hair is worked into a braided coronet with a single curled strand pinned forward across the brow like a question mark. You wonder if it's a signal or just flair. And yet she catches your eye in the mirror. Just briefly. Her reflection doesn't blink. Historians still argue whether such societies existed at all. Was it simply bored women making up games of pattern recognition? Or did they find ways to express autonomy and dissent in the only language left ungoverned fashion? Hair was among the few things a Victorian woman could truly claim as her own. Her house might be her husband's, her wages restricted or absorbed, her letters read. But her hair, its arrangement, its texture, its secrets, that was hers to command. It's not far-fetched then to imagine women using their hair as both shield and speech. After all other social codes existed, think of fan language or glove etiquette. A dropped handkerchief could mean, "Meet me at dusk." Why not a hair spiral tucked into the wrong place as a message that reads, "Don't trust the vicar"? There's even one peculiar case, an unsent letter found in the attic of a townhouse in Brighton. The letter is addressed only to E, and in it, the writer details a dream in which a woman's updo spelled out a full sentence. "I knew he lied, but loved him still." The letter ends abruptly as though interrupted. In the salon, the murmurs grow louder. Another hairdresser lifts a long strand, threads it into a figure-8 knot, and then clips it with an ornate comb shaped like a serpent eating its tail. The client says nothing, but you see her left heel tap twice against the base of her stool, as if confirming something has been received. And just behind her chair, in a forgotten frame, hangs a faded illustration titled "The Hidden Language of Coiffure." You squint at the bottom corner. There's no artist's signature, just a symbol, a coiled lock of hair in the shape of a spiral. You blink, and it's gone. The mirror reflects only you. The salon fades, the gaslights dim, and now you're somewhere warmer, closer. A boudoir, probably. There's a faint scent of scorched metal in the air, the telltale tang of something hot left too long. You glance toward the dressing table and see the culprit, a slender curling tong still faintly hissing, its clamp blackened at the tip. Victorian women were no strangers to heat tools. The invention of the heated curling iron in the early 19th century was nothing short of revolutionary for fashion. Yes, but also potentially for covert signaling. You're watching now as a young woman stands in front of her mirror tong in hand. She presses a section of hair into a soft wave, lets it fall, and moves on to the next. Each lock is carefully curled in a slightly different shape. You think surely that's just the inconsistency of hand styling. Except, each curl has a rhythm. One long, two short, then three short, then one tight spiral. It repeats again. The pattern stirs something in your memory. Morse code semaphore. Some strange variation. Historians still argue whether hair wave patterns ever functioned as an intentional form of visual encryption or if we're simply projecting too much poetry onto the past. But here's what's true. Women of the Victorian era were obsessed with pattern and order. Hairstyles were practiced, diagrammed, and codified. And when heat styling entered the picture, new levels of precision became possible. The tong before you, made of wrought iron heated in a coal stove, was wielded with delicate fury. A moment too long and the hair would singe. A moment too short and the curl would fall limp. You imagine the focus it required, the control. And you start to wonder if that kind of micro-control was sometimes strategic. According to fringe historians, some women use their curling patterns to pass information either by arrangement number or direction. One account describes a woman who curled the front sections of her hair inward on days when her husband was home and outward when she planned to sneak out and meet her sister. Was it fashion, maybe? But the consistency suggests more. You lean toward the dressing table. There's a faded style card wedged under a silver tray. It shows 10 curling patterns named things like the waterfall loop, the cascade ridge, and oddly, the whisper coil. That last one features a single curl wrapped in upon itself and pinned with a single ivory clip. The notation underneath reads, "Only when it matters." You look back at the woman. She has finished curling. She holds a mirror up to examine the back of her head. You spotted a single curl pinned unnaturally low, barely peeking from beneath the main wave. It looks like nothing, but it also looks deliberate. And here's the thing about Victorian society, it demanded silence from women, but it also gave them an arsenal of silent tools. Hair became not just beauty, but battlefield. Women had to operate within the rules, yes, but they got very good at hiding signals inside the rules. A mispinned lock, a colored ribbon, a missed curl on the left side always. Heat too left residue. Pomades, oils, and tonics used to protect hair from the damage of curling often left distinct scents: lavender, bay rum, even turpentine. These scents, when used consistently, became part of a woman's identity. But change the scent or omit it altogether. Suddenly someone notices, or doesn't. Both options are powerful. You think again of the phrase from that earlier letter, "I keep his words with me always woven near the nape." Perhaps some of those words were never written at all but curled, looped, and lacquered into place. The woman before you gives herself one last glance. She touches the lowest curl. Her finger lingers. Then she steps into the hallway and the door clicks shut behind her. You're left alone with the faint, acrid scent of iron and the slow cooling tong resting across a porcelain dish. You don't touch it. But you notice now engraved along the handle in tiny script, nearly worn away, just two words. Be careful. You stay a moment longer in the stillness of that boudoir, the air slowly cooling. The curling tong no longer hisses. It simply sits silent, ominous, and a little too purposeful. But the scene softens like powder brushed over bare skin, and now you're standing in a more cluttered corner of Victorian domesticity. The dressing room has been overtaken by little jars, round tins with faded labels, glass vials stoppered with wax. One brown bottle reads Madame Wexler's Violet Pomade for Luster and Tame. Another says Pearl Gloss contains arsenical brighteners, use sparingly. Ah yes, the era of poisonous beauty. You lean in as a young woman lifts a pomade jar to her nose and flinches. Understandable. That one smells faintly metallic. She dips her finger in anyway, smooths a bit over her scalp and carries on pinning up her hair. Victorian hair pomades weren't just cosmetics, they were chemistry sets. Made from lard bear grease and odd tinctures, they offered not only shine and hold, but occasionally a hint of something sinister. Mainstream historians will tell you. Arsenic and lead were once common in beauty products, not with malicious intent, but due to limited regulation and a complete lack of dermatological understanding. Women would apply these creams and oils directly to their scalps sometimes, causing rashes, hair loss, and worse. Lead acetate, for instance, was frequently used in hair dyes, giving a lustrous black but also slow poisoning. But fringe researchers have noticed something odd in certain forensic archives hair samples from upper-class Victorian women that contain traces of not just one or two, but multiple toxic elements: arsenic, lead, mercury, and even phosphorus, all layered in specific ratios. Now, ask yourself, how does a woman come into regular contact with all four unless she's mixing them herself? For what purpose? You reach for a jar marked foxglove extract. Do not ingest. And just beside it, a thin wooden hairpin with a hollowed-out core. Historians still argue whether women ever used pomades as deliberate vectors of poisoning or as tools of resistance. There are whispered tales of jealous rivals slowly dosing one another's supplies, of governesses slipping minute amounts of laudanum into their employers' hair oils just to see. Nothing proven, but enough odd deaths with untraceable symptoms to keep the question alive. There's even one tragicomic report from 1879 of a woman who wore a lock of her dead fiancé's hair in a locket, unaware it had been preserved in arsenic. She became ill over time, and no one made the connection. The locket now sits in a museum archive. Its clasp, tagged "Caution," retains trace poisons. Of course not. Every hair concoction was malicious. Some were practical. Hair tonics might include rosemary to ward off lice or violet oil to soothe an inflamed scalp. But once you know the ingredient list, you can't unsee how many of them double as medicinal compounds or poisons in the right dose. You lean toward a cracked mirror above the vanity. In its cloudy reflection, you notice something strange. The woman from earlier has returned her hair perfectly sculpted. She pulls a small tin from her sleeve, dabs something onto her fingertips, and begins massaging it into her hairline. She checks the mirror, then slips the tin back up her sleeve. You recognize the label, faint as it is, St. Clair's Elixir, for faithful obedience. Theories abound. Some say this so-called elixir was a euphemism for laudanum-laced pomade used in asylums. Others claim it was entirely invented. But if you believe the handwritten notes found in a hairdresser's journal from Manchester in 1884, there were clients who requested such formulas for husbands, for themselves. The journal's final entry is curt. The vicar's wife came again, less gray, eyes dull. Her parting requested thicker, less visible scalp. Was she ill-dying or just hiding? The room begins to blur again, soft as lard-based balm melting in a warm hand. The vanity vanishes. The bottles go silent. But something clings in the air. Not scent, not smoke. The impression of things layered just under the surface, quiet alchemy, heavy metals, and secrets that could singe you from the inside out. You emerge now into a different room entirely. Not a boudoir, not a parlor, but something in between. A beauty salon, yes, but not the ornate upstairs sort with silk wallpaper and marble basins. This one's tucked below street level, behind a velvet curtain, and a bell that doesn't quite ring. There's something underground about it, literally and figuratively. The space smells of warm soap-damp wool and lavender water gone slightly stale. Hair is everywhere, swept into neat piles clinging to aprons coiled in the brushes like abandoned threads of thought. You sit down quietly in the corner and watch. What unfolds here is not just styling, it's confession. A woman sits with her head bowed while a hairdresser gently detangles her curls. She's speaking softly, something about a sister-in-law, something about letters gone missing, something about a man who promised and then forgot. Her voice barely rises above the comb's whisper. And the hairdresser? She says almost nothing. She just nods her fingers, never stopping pinning and twisting as though braiding each regret into a rope of forgiveness. Victorian beauty salons were more than grooming stations. They were whisper networks. Safe zones where women could speak truths in coded language or no language at all. The kind of spaces where a question like, is the parting right, might really mean, does he suspect? And where the answer could come in the form of a slow, deliberate tuck behind the ear. Mainstream historians recognize salons as crucial to women's social spheres, but newer research points to a deeper function. Some stylists, especially those operating out of private homes, acted as intermediaries for letters, tokens, and sometimes entire plans. They were trusted. They had access, and most importantly, they knew how to keep things close to the scalp. There's even a curious case from 1873 in which a hairdresser in Liverpool was arrested for improper transport of sealed items. No packages were found, but inside her toolkit, two hollow-handled brushes, one stuffed with correspondence between a woman and her cousin, a known suffragist. Historians still argue whether these underground salons functioned as active political hubs or simply as incidental nodes of information. But the fact remains, women came in with stories, and sometimes left with more than a new fringe. In this salon, you watch the next client arrive. She's wearing gloves, which is strange, it's warm inside. She slips into the chair without greeting, and the stylist immediately begins unpinning her hair. Out fall 3 folded bits of ribbon. Each is a different shade of red. The stylist doesn't react. She gathers the ribbons, brushes them aside, and begins working. You wonder if the ribbons meant something. A warning, a message, a payment. There's a theory from a fringe scholar that Victorian hairdressers used colored fabric scraps as part of a salon-specific signaling system: red for loyalty, green for danger, blue for payment received. But no hard evidence, just patterns, just stories. Like the one about the woman who always left her salon with her part exactly 2 millimeters off-center. And the one about the girl who came every week for a simple braid only to have it stitched with invisible thread that unraveled when pulled from a certain angle. Your eyes return to the mirror in front of the newest client. Her reflection seems weary but calm. And as the stylist begins to twist her hair upward into a bun, you notice the faintest smile playing at the corner of her lips. Perhaps she has said what needed saying without words, or perhaps it was received. Outside, a carriage rattles past. Inside, the soft clip of scissors continues. You sit still, you listen, and in the room filled with shears and secrets, the air thickens not with hairspray, but with trust. The salon fades behind you like a dream tucked into a braid, and you find yourself in a room not unlike a dressing chamber, but quieter, dimmer, and far more peculiar. It's a small guest bedroom in a house that's seen better wallpaper. The curtains are drawn and only one candle burns beside a writing desk littered with bits of ribbon, broken comb teeth, and the odd sewing needle bent into a faint question mark. You hear the soft clatter of pins being counted. A girl no older than 16 sits hunched over her lap. In one hand, she holds a long, thick hairpin. In the other, a tightly rolled paper scrap so small it could vanish in a blink. She breathes slowly, then inserts the scroll into the hollow core of the pin. Victorian hairpins weren't always solid. In fact, some higher-end ones were made with thin metal tubing, making them perfect not just for holding hair in place, but for hiding other things. A miniature message, a short strip of cloth, a smudge of powder, harmless or otherwise. As you lean closer, you see the hairpin she's using is engraved faintly with the word Charlotte, probably a gift or a warning. Hairpins were both tool and talisman. They held together towering updos, managed complex buns, and when necessary, doubled as emergency utensils, lockpicks. And if you believe the darker tales, weapons. Mainstream historians acknowledge the everyday utility of hairpins, but rarely address their more subversive possibilities. Yet, museum archives contain specimens with curious alterations. Hollow shafts, acid corrosion on the interior metal, even traces of what modern forensics identify as residual ink. One theory holds that certain women used these pins to carry miniature love notes or codes during courtships, particularly when privacy was impossible. The message could be burned, or swallowed if discovered, or simply thrown in the fireplace during a dramatic hair toss. You watch now as the girl lifts her hair into a casual twist and tucks the loaded pin into the base. Her hands tremble, but her face remains calm. She stands, steps to the door, and opens it where another young woman waits silently, no more than a glance exchanged. And just before leaving, the girl removes another pin, this one plain, and leaves it on the desk like punctuation. Historians still argue whether message-carrying hairpins were widely used or merely figments of post-Victorian romanticism. But evidence continues to surface. A restoration team in York once discovered a collection of 19th-century pins hidden inside a false bottom drawer. Some were scorched at the ends, others notched near the cap, possible indicators of reuse or of a primitive filing system. Then there are the bobby traps. Yes, bobby traps. Fringe accounts detail how certain politically active women, particularly suffragists, modified their hairpins to carry acidic compounds. These would corrode wire locks or, when splashed with water, reveal hidden writing on otherwise blank slips of paper. One hairpin found in a London attic was curled shut at the tip like a miniature scroll case. Inside, a scrap of linen bearing the initials ES and a line that read, "If found, burn and run." You're back in the guest room now. The candle flickers lower. The empty pin lies forgotten on the desk. You reach for it and feel the weight difference, a touch heavier than usual. Maybe from years of secrets, or maybe from something still inside. You don't open it. Some things, after all, prefer to stay coiled in silence. Outside the window, rain begins to fall in soft, uneven taps, like a code only the pins could decipher. The rain continues tapping softly against window panes as the candle guttered behind you disappears entirely. Now you're somewhere colder, sparser. You feel it first in your skin. The absence of warmth, the echo of emptiness that lives in institutional walls. You're inside a Victorian mental asylum. Not one of the dark, dungeon-like caricatures painted by Gothic novels, but a real one. Clean, orderly, smelling faintly of soap mildew and resignation. Here the rules are sharp. No mirrors, no personal items, and most telling of all, no hairpins. Hair for the women admitted here is kept short, braided plainly, or shorn entirely. But not out of cruelty necessarily. It's practicality, it's order, it's control. And yet, despite these constraints, some women fight back with the only resource they still physically own: their hair. You notice her right away, sitting near the back of the room during afternoon quiet time. Her posture is demure compliant, but there's something off. The way her hand twitches toward her braid, the way her fingers coil the end like she's trying to remember something. And that's when you see it, a single tiny bead red glass woven into the lowest twist of her hair. Too subtle for staff to notice. Too intentional to be decoration. Hair became resistance. In institutions where letters were censored and visitors denied, some women communicated with one another through silent hairstyles. A twist to the left, I remember who I am. A braid too tight, I've been punished. Beads, ribbons, thread, whatever they could find. Mainstream scholars often gloss over asylum fashion, but newer research delves into how women found ways to reclaim identity through their appearance. Fringe historians have even documented reports of smuggled thread used to sew patterns into braids, tiny tactile Morse code for those close enough to touch. You imagine them now side by side during mandated exercise, walking slowly in circles through the garden. A glance, a braid passed between fingers, a code shared with no words. Historians still argue whether this form of communication was widespread or isolated, a phenomenon sparked by desperation or one born from careful planning. Some dismiss the notion entirely. But then there's the 1888 record from Holloway Sanatorium. Patient refused standard braid, requested double knot parting 3 days running, warned against behavior. What was a double knot parting? Was it defiance or a distress signal? One tale, uncorroborated of course, speaks of a woman who braided a full map of the asylum grounds into her own hair using thread and bobby pins. She was caught. Her braid was removed, but not before her roommate slipped out through the laundry corridor the next morning and was never seen again. True, hard to say. But if you'd lived in a place where your voice no longer mattered, wouldn't you find another way to speak? You step into a small hallway now. The walls are bare. The silence is absolute. And yet, in one of the patient journals archived from this facility, you find a line that simply reads, "I pin myself shut each night so I don't unravel." You picture her again. The woman from the room, sitting cross-legged on her bed, her hands working quietly. No thread, no needle. Just the same act over and over again: twist, tuck, braid, bind. A private language, a memory knot, and maybe, just maybe, an escape plan woven behind the ear. You leave the asylum like a breath held too long, released into dusk. The silence recedes, but not entirely. Because now you're in the company of someone who knows how to vanish in plain sight. She walks with a purpose that doesn't match her parasol or the flounce of her dress. Her gloves are buttoned wrong on purpose. Her smile is too polite, and her hair a thick, glossy beehive that seems to defy gravity. Welcome to the world of espionage. You follow her down a narrow London street, brick buildings pressing close. She's one of the many forgotten figures of the Victorian underworld, the female spy. And tonight her secrets are coiled beneath that elegant pile of hair. Victorian women, especially those in diplomatic, theatrical, or travel circles, sometimes acted as covert couriers. Not because they were trained operatives, but precisely because they weren't expected to be. They could go anywhere, listen quietly, and carry things men would never dare smuggle. And where better to hide something dangerous than inside an elaborate hairstyle no one dares touch? You watch her reach up ever so casually and adjust a decorative pin. But that's no ordinary pin. That's a hollow silver shaft just wide enough for a rolled microfilm, or a smudge of cyanide, or a drop of mercury. Mainstream records from military archives do mention a few female couriers, but the details are sparse. Names withheld. Activities marked classified. Still, certain artifacts recovered during estate cleanouts or museum donations suggest that more than a few of these women carried their payloads in the one place no gentleman would search: under a corset or inside a bun. Fringe researchers love this topic. There are whispered tales of women hiding assassination orders, forged signatures, or chemical samples inside braided extensions. One particularly persistent rumor involves a courtesan in Paris who allegedly hid a miniature revolver in her hairpiece. Historians still argue whether this was myth mistranslation or simply very creative hairstyling. You pass a tailor's shop now and see her reflection in the window. Her hair catches the gaslight and waves, and if you look closely, you can see the asymmetry. The back is slightly bulkier than the front. That's not a fashion faux pas. That's a compartment. Beehive hairstyles, so popular in the latter half of the 19th century, were often constructed using inner padding, sometimes called rats, sometimes called cages. Women with access to tailors or skilled wig makers could request custom interiors, hidden compartments, even collapsible frames. You recall one archived design sketch found in Vienna, a hair cage with a hidden hinge and latch made of lightweight brass. The sketch is unsigned, but annotated in spidery German Zweck vertrauliche Lieferung. Purpose: confidential delivery. She turns now, this woman you've been following. She steps into a post office not to send a letter but to intercept one. And you notice as she leans forward to speak with the clerk, her chignon shifts slightly. Not enough to fall apart, just enough to breathe. And here's where the line between style and subversion really begins to blur. Hair became camouflage, not just for beauty but for misdirection. Thick hair could hide capsules. Bald spots could disguise scalp tattoos, yes. Those existed, though rarely spoken of. A precisely placed part could obscure a scar, a symbol, a burn from sealing wax or dropped acid. One recovered hair journal from 1892 includes this chilling phrase, choked the word into the braid. If he finds it, he dies. You're no longer in the street. You're standing at her mirror now. The spy. She's home, alone. Dismantling the night. Her gloves come off. Her corset drops. But the hair stays for now. Only when she's absolutely sure the doors are locked, the curtains drawn, and the gas lamp extinguished does she reach up and unpin the hive. It opens like a clamshell. You gasp, but she doesn't notice. Inside a small packet wrapped in oilcloth, sealed with red wax. No label, just a mark scratched in with a pin, plus she replaces the cloth, retwists the frame, and pins it back into place. To the world, she's just another woman with great hair. But tonight in the darkness, she's a courier of consequences. The spy's silhouette fades into the mirror, and now you're no longer in London. You're somewhere softer, somewhere quieter. A girl's bedroom, candle-lit and careful, filled with scraps of thread. A small pair of embroidery scissors and a worn wooden brush dotted with stray auburn hairs. She's seated on the floor, legs tucked beneath her like a question never asked aloud. And in her lap, a strange little book not bound in leather or paper but in ribbon and twine. It's a hair diary. Yes, really. Not a diary about hair. A diary made of hair. Each page is a loop of plaited strands tied in place with colored beads, threads, and miniature charms. Each symbol meaning something, though the code is hers alone. And maybe her sister's, or her best friend's, or the boy who once kissed her hand on a dare beneath a sycamore tree. Hair diaries, though rarely mentioned, did exist. While mainstream scholars mostly dismiss them as sentimental craftwork, a few fringe historians suggest they operated more like tactile journals or encrypted friendship books. Instead of ink on paper, emotions were braided. Events were marked with knots. Threads of different colors denoted people, places, moments. Sometimes even warnings. You watch her now as she selects a long black thread and weaves it delicately through an ash-blonde braid loop. Then with a single stitch, she adds a red bead. Her hands are steady, her face unreadable. It's her way of saying he kissed her, not me. Or maybe she lied to me at church. Or maybe something simpler, I'm not okay today. Historians still argue whether these hair diaries were widespread or confined to specific girlhood circles somewhere between folklore and fashion. But in at least 2 known estates, full collections have been recovered. One hidden inside the false bottom of a dollhouse. Another rolled and sealed in beeswax inside a decorative tin labeled lace ends. Both feature intricate hairwork threaded with symbols, each repetition almost obsessive, each deviation deliberate. What makes these artifacts so curious is their longevity. Hair survives, paper fades, ink runs, but a braid once tied stays tied. These records weren't made to be read aloud. They were meant to be felt, fingered, remembered. You shift closer. She's humming now, something low and circular, like a lullaby that's forgotten the words. Her braid diary rests across her knees and she adds one final touch, a sliver of blue silk wrapped tight around the end of the newest plait. Then she ties the loop shut and tucks the whole thing into a hollowed-out book spine. Yes, you heard that right. She's hidden it inside a gutted novel, Jane Eyre no less. As if Bronte herself might conspire to keep the secret safe. You notice other titles on her shelf too. Wuthering Heights, Pilgrim's Progress Etiquette for Young Ladies. Each one could be hollow. Each one a vault of feelings no diary would dare describe. You look to her mirror and notice something else. A single long hair coiled on the vanity table, stretched out beside a sewing needle and a line of faded chalk. There's no comb, no brush, just silence. And maybe that's the point. These were journals for the voiceless, for the girls who weren't allowed to write about love, or rage, or envy. So they braided it into loops, into meaning, into silence. And no one thought to search for stories beneath their curls. You take one last glance at the book before she snaps it shut. It's so slight, so soft, so quiet, and yet it holds more confession than 1,000 pages of ink ever could. The book closes with a whisper, and now you're in a courtroom. The light is colder here, filtered through dusty windows in a foggy London sky. The walls are lined with wooden panels, solemn and straight as if designed to stifle emotion. But the drama in the room is anything but muted. You take your place near the back just as the bailiff announces the next witness. A maid in a pressed gray dress, eyes red from too many sleepless nights. In her gloved hand, a locket. Not just any locket, but one containing a coil of hair so familiar, so damning, it's changed the course of the case. This is the infamous case of the locket switcheroo. A real Victorian scandal that held the papers in thrall for weeks. It began, as these things often did, with an accusation infidelity, of course. A husband claiming betrayal. A wife denying everything. A maid caught in the middle. And the evidence. A single hair locket supposedly worn in secret by the wife, containing not her husband's golden strands but a dark, unmistakably different curl. Mainstream historians record the case as one of social embarrassment more than legal consequence. But what made it remarkable was the courtroom itself, where the hair was examined, debated, and eventually dissected under magnifying glass, strand by strand. You lean in as the judge asks the barrister to present the object. It's removed from its velvet pouch with ceremony. The locket clicks open, revealing the coil. Dark chestnut, slightly oiled, still smelling faintly of rosewater, someone swears. The husband glares. The wife sobs. And the maid. She clears her throat and delivers a line that freezes the gallery. That is not her hair. Q gasps. The courtroom scene unfolds like a farce written in mourning black. Turns out the locket had been switched. Not just the hair inside, but the entire casing. The clasp mechanism was different. The filigree finer. A quiet swap done one night, while the mistress slept, orchestrated not out of malice but from desperation. Historians still argue whether the switch was a romantic deception or an act of sabotage. Some accounts say the maid had fallen in love with the mistress and wanted to protect her. Others claim she was blackmailed. One particularly lurid article in the Illustrated Police News even alleged the maid had a collection of stolen hair lockets hidden beneath the floorboards of her rented room. No proof, of course. Just a few tabloid sketches showing a pile of lockets and a girl weeping into her apron. You look now at the woman in the witness box, the wife. She clutches her handkerchief and turns away from the evidence like it burns her. And maybe it does. Because in the Victorian mind, hair wasn't just symbolic, it was literal. To carry someone's hair was to claim a piece of their body. A strand meant a bond. A braid meant a vow. And a locket meant you belong to me in some form or fashion. Which is why when that hair doesn't match the story, everything else unravels. There's one more twist in the case, of course. There always is. After the verdict, an ambiguous judgment that satisfied no one, the locket in question disappeared. Vanished from the evidence table before it could be sealed into court records. Some say the wife reclaimed it. Others say the maid fled with it, tucked in her boot. One theory, too poetic not to mention, claims the locket was buried under a rose bush behind the courthouse as part of an oath never to speak of it again. No one found it. But decades later, a different locket turned up in an antique store in Essex. Inside, a chestnut curl and a note too faded to read. You walk past the witness box as the scene fades. The gallery is empty now. The locket sits alone on the bench. It's small, delicate, but heavy with meaning. And once again you wonder, was it ever just hair? The courtroom vanishes behind a curtain of fog, and now you're standing in a sunlit dressing chamber. Golden afternoon rays slanting through leaded windows, catching dust in midair. It's peaceful here. too peaceful, almost as if the room's trying to hide something. On a carved oak table lies a gleaming hair comb. You step closer, drawn by its unusual shape. At first glance, it's just a pretty accessory, tortoiseshell teeth, delicate filigree, a row of opal studs across the top. But look again. There along the underside of the largest tooth is a thin scratch. And not just any scratch. Letters, tiny, etched so finely you'd miss them unless you tilted the comb just so. You spell it out. Don't forget what she did. It lands like a whisper. Victorian decorative combs were often lavish, sometimes symbolic. A gift from a suitor, a family heirloom, a mourning token. But in rarer cases, they were more than decoration. They were confession, retaliation, warnings tucked into elegance. You turn the comb over and see something stranger. The end of one tooth has been filed into a point sharper than it should be. You imagine a woman slipping this into her hair before an uncomfortable dinner, or worse, before a meeting she didn't want to have alone. Historians still argue whether such combs were ever weaponized or simply worn with a theatrical edge. There's no confirmed report of one being used for violence, but there are murmurs in personal letters. One from 1871 reads, "She walked into the room with her hair piled high, and the silver comb I gave her gleaming like a dagger. I do not think she came to reconcile." That same year, a comb was found embedded in the plaster wall of a boarding house room, snapped in half, its tip lodged 6 inches deep. Coincidence, perhaps, or perhaps not. There's also the matter of combs as records. Some women kept a series of them, each representing a chapter in their lives. One might bear the initials of a child who died young. Another might have a lover's name etched beneath the teeth. Some combs found in attic trunks reveal entire phrases, like one carved with the line, "What I couldn't say aloud I wore behind my ear." You sit at the vanity, now picking up a second comb. This one is simpler, bone, not shell, worn smooth. But still along its spine, a single letter is scratched over and over again, JJJJ. Is it a name, a curse, an invocation? Fringe researchers speculate some combs were used as mnemonic tools, ways to keep stories alive without writing them down. Especially among women denied education or those afraid their journals might be read. To etch a symbol, a name, a number, it was quiet, private, and permanent. You hear footsteps now. Someone approaches. You set the comb down gently. A woman enters, middle-aged, deliberate, her eyes lined not with kohl but with memory. She takes the comb you just studied, slips it into her bun without ceremony, and glances at herself in the mirror. She smiles, but not sweetly. That's the thing about accessories in the Victorian world. They weren't always soft. They weren't always innocent. A comb could be armor. A hairpin could be protest. A ribbon could be the last thing someone ever gave you. You step back as she turns away, leaving behind a faint shimmer of scent, something floral with an edge of iron. Outside, a coach rattles by. Inside, the empty comb tray waits. You wonder what it held before, and what it remembers now. You leave the dressing room behind, but not the feeling. It follows you now, threaded through the walls, whispering down staircases. And when you open the next door, it doesn't lead to another boudoir or a courtroom or a salon. It leads into an attic. Low ceiling. Dust, thick air. The scent of old linen and dried lavender. A cracked window lets in a slice of moonlight, silvering the shapes in the dark. You're not alone. There's a wig stand in the center of the room holding a full Victorian hairpiece. It looks theatrical, voluminous curls, high crown, the kind of style worn to dinner parties where the roast pheasant arrived with its feathers still on. But what's beneath that hair is stranger still. You lift the wig. It's heavier than expected. Inside the cap is a small wooden compartment. Not obvious, not clunky, just a flat hinged panel stitched under layers of linen. You open it. Folded inside is a brittle yellowed letter, never sent, never finished. Its ink has bled in places, but the signature is still legible. Yours in silence, M. Victorian wigs were worn for all kinds of reasons. Illness, fashion, vanity, even status. Some were made from horsehair. Others from the real hair of servants or anonymous donors. but a select few particularly custom jobs made for actresses or aristocrats came with something extra: hidden drawers. Mainstream scholars tend to sideline wig history, treating it as a footnote of costume culture. But fringe archivists have documented no fewer than 8 wigs with compartments. One contained a pressed rose, one held a child's photograph, and one disturbingly concealed a small pouch of bone fragments labeled Teeth, 1864. You stare at the stand. It holds not just a wig but a mask, a second life. You wonder who wore it, and why they chose to store something so fragile where no one would dare look. In the corner of the attic, you find a vanity trunk, brass hinges, dusty green velvet lining. Inside, another wig. This one smaller, tighter curls. And wedged into its lining, a scrap of hair ribbon embroidered with the name Clara, followed by 3 dates, one of which is marked with a red cross. Historians still argue whether these hidden compartments were common or entirely bespoke, the eccentric choices of women with too much to lose and too few places to hide it. But some believe these wigs functioned as mobile reliquaries, hair-worn shrines to lost love, unsent words, forbidden truths. There's a story of one woman, an opera singer, who wore a wig every night on stage. She always removed it herself, refused help. After her death, it was discovered that the base was lined with handwritten letters, dozens of them never posted, never spoken, never even addressed. What happens to secrets kept too long against the skin? Do they evaporate, or do they haunt? You glance again at the wig in your hands. The curls are stiff with age, and yet there's a scent, something faint, floral but old. You recognize it as orris root, used in Victorian times to scent hair powder and preserve fabric. And next to the wig stand, resting quietly, is a sewing needle bent into a crescent. You look closer. It's been used clearly, but not for mending. There's hair wrapped around it, carefully, like thread. And suddenly the attic feels heavier, not sinister, just full. Full of things no one ever said aloud. Full of stories whispered only to a wig stand or a powder brush or a mirror too fogged to judge. You leave the compartment open. You let the letter breathe. Down below, the house creaks softly. It remembers too. The attic fades as all secrets eventually do. And now you find yourself somewhere tender, familiar, intimate. A bedroom at dusk. The wallpaper is faded but floral, the quilt hand-stitched with tiny roses. A hairbrush rests beside a tin of dusting powder. This room is not about hiding anymore. It's about remembering. You're with an older woman now, gray at the temples, though her hair is still long, still thick. She sits at her vanity without urgency, without the fussy choreography of youth. The pins come out slowly, the bun uncoils. The day dissolves one hair strand at a time. She begins brushing. Long strokes, slow, repetitive. The bristles hum a soft rhythm against her scalp, and you feel it, the ceremony of it. This is the end of her day, yes. But also the archive of everything she didn't say. Because in the Victorian world, the final ritual before bed wasn't just about hygiene. It was about release. You watch as she opens the dusting powder, a gentle puff of lilac and orris root fills the air. She taps a bit along her hairline or temples, the back of her neck. She doesn't need it, but she does it anyway. It's habit, it's grace. It's a ritual passed from mother to daughter to niece to no one. And that's the heartbreak. Because who remembers that powder was once made with crushed pearls, that the brushing strokes were counted 100 each night, that every knot tugged free carried a thought, a worry, a name. Historians still argue whether these nighttime routines were acts of devotion or just a Victorian obsession with appearance. But you feel, sitting here beside her, that they were something more, a quiet farewell to the day, a whispered inventory of the self. There's a hair receiver here too, still collecting, still preserving what time tries to take. Some women threw the strands away, some wove them into hair rats, and some, like this woman, just saved them because it felt like something should be saved. She hums now, not a melody, just a sound. The same note over and over as she parts her hair one last time and begins to braid. Not tight, not for show, just enough to keep it from tangling overnight. As she works, she murmurs names Eleanor, Marjorie, Thomas, and one you don't recognize, Elspeth. Each name a stitch, a memory, a thread that will vanish if not tied to something. You glance at the dusting powder tin again. It's embossed with initials worn to near nothing. But you trace them anyway. MEB, maybe a mother, maybe herself, maybe the girl she used to be. She finishes the braid, tucks it under her cap, blows out the lamp, and the room folds into shadow. The brush remains on the vanity, still warm from her touch. The powder settles. The names drift into the fabric of the pillow like dreams left behind. And now, at last you rest with her hair-braided secrets bound, the day coiled shut like a shell on the seafloor. The night is thick now, not heavy, just soft. Everything has been put away, the pins, the powders, the little folded letters stitched into curls. There's nothing left to unearth, nothing that needs to be hidden, not tonight. You lie back, your head sinking into the same invisible weight that held 100 Victorian heads before sleep. The same rituals, the same combs passed hand to hand, whispering history without a sound. You imagine those women, young and old, sitting in their lamplight, brushing and braiding, humming to themselves, maybe crying a little, maybe laughing into the silence. Each strand drawn through a brush, a record of everything they couldn't write down. There were no headlines for their grief, no statues for their cleverness. But in their hair they carried it all, the love, the loss, the fear, the hope. They coiled it, pinched it shut, tucked it under bonnets and behind ears and into lockets no one ever opened. And even now those stories linger, in museums, in trunks, in the way we still sometimes twirl our hair when we're nervous, or braid it when we need to feel whole. So breathe. Let the weight of pins fall away. Let the powder settle. Let the strands unwind. You're safe here. Sleep well. You're among women who remembered everything.